Hello. This is Attorney Mike Graven coming to you from Chicago as usual. And this case just caught my interest. Let's see if it's good stuff or not.
Courtroom or outside of the courtroom. The cameras may be allowed to photograph the testimony of certain witnesses and not others, or only portions of testimony of some witnesses. You should not draw any inference or conclusions whatsoever from this fact. The prosecuting attorney may now make an opening statement. The defendant's attorney may make an opening statement or may wait until later in the trial to do so. What is said in opening statement is not evidence. The opening statement is simply the lawyer's opportunity to tell you what the lawyer expects the evidence will show. State, you may make your opening statement.
I'm a big skier. I'm fascinated by this. I want to know what's going on. I don't know what's happening yet.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and attention this morning. I know it's a long morning, and now that you ate lunch, hopefully we won't put you to sleep. So thank you, though, for being honest in your answers so that we can pick the most fair and impartial jury for this trial. This is a criminal trial, as you heard, commenced against the state of New Mexico against Dean Cummings. And I'm going to play for you a phone call from a 911 operator to the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office dispatch that was made on February 29th of 2020. And hopefully I can.
I'm learning as I go here.
Let me see. I bet my audio's on. Nothing like electronics. Is it on the court thing?
Pardon me?
On the podium thing? Because I have it plugged in.
Is Jason here?
Is this New Mexico?
That's okay. I'll proceed without it. I'll proceed without it.
I haven't skied at Taos yet. It's on my list.
Plugged in.
We're going to find out. We're about to play 911 call. That usually gives some info.
That's okay. I'll proceed without it. Thank you for your time and attention, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing like technology to put a bump in the road, right?
Thank you all for coming out.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you heard, or you can guess from what Vodire, this case isn't about who did it or how it was done. This case, the facts for you to decide are whether or not this homicide was committed in self-defense or whether it was committed with or without sufficient provocation. A second-degree murder is a homicide that was committed without having been sufficiently provoked, whereas a voluntary manslaughter is a homicide committed after having been sufficiently provoked. And the judge is going to give you the definitions to all of these things and what that law means. This case, ladies and gentlemen, is a case about reasonableness.
Okay.
And you, ladies and gentlemen, are the finders of the facts.
The
state has the burden of proof of showing that Dean Cummings, the defendant in this case, committed this homicide beyond a reasonable doubt. And the state will also show that the defendant, Mr. Cummings, also committed the crime of tampering with evidence. And that is because he washed his face, his hands, and changed his clothing after committing that homicide. And the state will also show that he committed the crime of concealing identity, because when law enforcement came and interacted with him, he didn't give his identity to them. The evidence is going to show, ladies and gentlemen, that on February...
Ms. Walker, IT person, if you want to.
That's okay. I'll just proceed. It's fine.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is going to show that on February 29th of 2020, at Guillermo Adiola's ranch, which is way out past Cabazon Peak, in the far remote area of Sandoval County, New Mexico, a ranch that is so remote that there is no cell phone service out there. And a ranch that is so remote that law enforcement had to use GPS coordinates on the search warrants. The evidence is going to show that the defendant killed Guillermo Adiola in his trailer. And the evidence will show that Mr. Adiola had been contemplating selling this ranch to Dean Cummings. He had his realtor, Christine Landers, draft up a real estate contract to sell this property to Mr. Cummings. Mr. Cummings had time to contemplate the purchase of this property and had not yet signed the real estate contract at the time of the homicide.
This is already
On
getting
February
weird.
29th, 2020, Guillermo Adiola drove out to his ranch out in Sandoval County to meet with Mr. Cummings. Mr. Cummings shot and killed Mr. Adiola with a Sig Sauer AR-15 rifle. This rifle had a 30-round magazine and a scope on it. Mr. Adiola was 47 years old at the time of his death.
How do we
He
get
was
to
shot 2
manslaughter
times
from that?
day. He was shot once in the head and once in the chest. Law enforcement came and processed the scene, and they recovered 10 casings, spent casings, from that bedroom where he was shot. In Mr. Adiola's right hand was a can of mace, and that can of mace was facing Mr. Adiola, not outwards towards any attacker, but facing him and his body. You will be asked to determine whether the reasonableness of Mr. Cummings' actions when he committed this homicide. Were his actions reasonable when he shot and killed Mr. Adiola with an AR-15? Initially, when law enforcement went, Mr. Cummings refused to identify himself when the deputies made contact with him. And Mr. Cummings told the Sandoval County Sheriff's deputies that he killed Mr. Adiola in self-defense because he was sprayed with a neurological agent, presumably the mace. Mr. Cummings told deputies that he washed himself off to get rid of the neurological agent and that he changed his clothing. Now let's talk about the evidence that's going to be presented to you over the next week, week and a half. You're going to hear testimony from Christine Landers. Ms. Landers is going to tell you that she drafted that real estate contract for Mr. Adiola to sell the land to Mr. Cummings. She's going to tell you that she met Mr. Cummings and Mr. Adiola about a month before the homicide to go over this real estate contract. She's going to tell you that Mr. Cummings had his fifth will parked on the ranch property. And you're also going to hear testimony from David McCullough. Mr. McCullough will tell you that on February 29, 2020, which was a leap day, he was out riding his ATV out in the middle of the desert at Cabazon Peak, and he came upon Mr. Cummings. Mr. Cummings spoke with him and conversed with him for about an hour, and then Mr. Cummings asked him to come with him to witness the body. Mr. Cummings told Mr. McCullough that he killed a man in self-defense and he wanted him to witness the body. Mr. McCullough followed Mr. Cummings back to the ranch, and Mr. McCullough will tell you that he had medical training, so he believed he could render aid to anybody who was injured. So that's why he went back to the trailer, to the ranch, to see if he could render aid. Mr. McCullough will tell you that Mr. Adiola was past the point of aid being rendered. The defendant, Dean Cummings, told Mr. McCullough that he had used the rifle in the back of his truck to kill Mr. Adiola. Mr. McCullough will tell you that he saw the rifle in the back of Mr. Cummings' truck, and then he proceeded to drive to an area where he could get cell phone service.
Why are we at trial?
Mr. Cummings stayed back at the ranch while Mr. McCullough drove out to get cell phone service. The area was so remote that it took him several times to get in touch with a 911 dispatch. And you'll hear those calls, and they continue to be dropped. He made about 4 calls to 911. You'll hear those calls. Mr. McCullough waited for law enforcement, and then he led them to the remote area where the ranch was located. After Mr. McCullough called law enforcement, then Mr. Cummings also called law enforcement. You're going to hear testimony from several Sandoval County Sheriff's deputies. You're going to hear testimony from Deputy Hayden Walker. He was one of the initial responding officers that responded on February 29, 2020. You'll hear that he met Mr. McCullough, and Mr. McCullough led him into the ranch. And you'll hear that Mr. Cummings told him he killed Mr. Adiola in self-defense because he was sprayed with a neurological agent. Deputy Walker placed Mr. Cummings in the back of his patrol car while they conducted the investigation. And Mr. Cummings tells the deputies that he placed the rifle on the porch and that he had the magazine, he took the magazine out, and they were both laying on the porch for them. Mr. Cummings tells Deputy Walker that he washed his face off and his hands and changed his clothing. You'll also hear testimony from Deputy Jonathan Crispin, and he also responded to the scene with Deputy Walker. They secured the scene. They made contact with Mr. McCullough. He collected some witness statements while he was there on scene, and then they secured the perimeter. They went into the trailer to make sure that there was nobody else that was injured, and then they held the scene until the remainder of law enforcement can come. You're going to hear testimony from Sergeant Thomas Griffin, another officer with the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office, and he was the on-scene sergeant out there at the ranch. He arrived with Deputy Gutierrez, and he was present when Mr. Cummings was evaluated by emergency medical services. Mr. Cummings told Sergeant Griffin that the clothing he was wearing at the time of the homicide was in the back of his truck. So Deputy Griffin collects those clothing, and he's going to tell you that the clothing was indeed wet, as if Mr. Cummings had washed himself off. Sergeant Griffin also assisted with the towing of the vehicles from that ranch. They towed the vehicle of Guillermo Adiola. They towed the vehicle of Mr. Cummings, his truck, as well as the fifth wheel. Sergeant Griffin also collected the evidence. So
Seriously?
in this homicide, the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office called the New Mexico State Police, and they come out and they assist with the crime scene. So he collected the evidence from the New Mexico State Police that was collected from the scene that day, and he's the one who tags it into evidence. You'll also hear testimony from Lieutenant Frank Tomlinson, our case agent here. He was assigned this investigation, and he's the one who was in charge of making sure everything got done. Lieutenant Tomlinson assisted with the investigation while working out of the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office, which is right here in the courthouse, while Thomas Griffin was the one at the ranch, because there was no cell phone service. They had to play telephone tag, if you will, to get sure the warrants done. He wrote several warrants, and he interviewed several witnesses, and you're going to hear about all of that part of the investigation. He also transported the evidence. As I stated, the New Mexico State Police assisted with this investigation by processing the scene, and you're going to hear testimony from Carlos Herrera, the New Mexico State Police case agent. He was the criminalistics agent, so he was the one in charge of making sure all of the evidence is documented and collected. New Mexico State Police arrived at the ranch after the warrants were granted so that they collect and document everything. He'll tell you about the processing of the scene. One person is assigned to take photographs. One person is assigned to scan the scene. And he was assigned with documenting the case scenes, the trajectory, where the blood was, and things like that. Agent Herrera is going to tell you that he collected 10 spent casings from the scene that day. He collected the mace, and he collected the AR-15 rifle. Agent Bogue, also of the New Mexico State Police.
I have this slightly sped up.
She was assigned with running what's called a Leica scanner, and it's a scanner that scans the whole room, and she uses
Because we're a few minutes behind
to create a diagram.
the
She'll
long crime
testify
scene.
about the diagram that she created that documents where the body is, where the casings were, and the outline of the house. And you're finally going to hear from Jennifer Otto. She is the New Mexico Department of Public Safety DNA analyst. She's going to testify about the analysis of the evidence that was sent to her for review and whose DNA was on what and what kind of DNA it was. And finally, you'll hear from Dr. Heather Gerald of the Office of Medical Investigator. She is the chief medical investigator there at UNM, and she conducted the autopsy of Guillermo Adiola. She's going to testify that Mr. Adiola had 2 gunshot wounds to his body. The first gunshot wound was to the head, and it entered at the right temple with a trajectory of right to left and downward. Dr. Gerald will testify that there was a second gunshot wound of the chest, and it entered at the supraclavicle region of the chest and exited the left side of the chest. As I stated, ladies and gentlemen, this is a case of reasonableness. A second-degree murder is a homicide committed without having been provoked, and a voluntary manslaughter is a homicide committed after having been sufficiently provoked. And the judge is going to give you the definition of what sufficient provocation is. Again, this case isn't about who did it or how it was done. The facts for you, ladies and gentlemen, are to decide whether this homicide was committed in self-defense or whether it was committed with or without sufficient provocation.
Wow, doing this with
This
the
is
math
a case of reasonableness, and you are the finders of fact.
crazy.
You are going to determine whether or not Mr. Cummings' actions were reasonable on that day when he shot and killed Mr. Adiola with an AR-15 rifle when he only had mace. And I surmise to you that the evidence will show that there was no struggle in the bedroom, that little bedroom on February 29th, 2020. And the evidence will show that this was
All
not a
counsel
justified
has them, so
homicide.
that must be the
Mr.
rule.
Adiola cannot speak about what happened in that little room on that day, but the evidence will show what happened on that day. And at the end of the case, the state, we're going to ask you to find Mr. Cummings guilty of second-degree murder or the
Kelly knows
lesser
the
included
rules.
offense of voluntary manslaughter for the killing of Guillermo Adiola. And we'll ask you to find the defendant guilty of tampering with evidence for him washing his hands, his face, and changing his clothes after the homicide. And we will ask you to find him guilty of concealing his identity when he refused to identify himself to the law enforcement officers on that day. And thank you for your time.
Wow. All right. I'm riveted. I want to know what the defense is going to say here. Please tell me it's not a sovereign citizen.
Ms. Moss.
Counsel. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good afternoon. This case is not about who did it. Ms. Walker is correct, because Guillermo Adiola was shot and killed by Dean Cummings. There's no dispute in that. So the question before the court, before the jury, isn't who killed him, but why. And the evidence is going to explain to you why that happened. The facts that led up to the death of Mr. Ariola. Mr. Cummings told the police when he called 911 that day, he called them and he told them, my name is Dean
Serious
Cummings.
one.
I just shot and killed a man in self-defense. So he told the police that right away. And he told David McCullough that right away. Because after this shooting happened, Mr. Cummings reacted. He was in the middle of nowhere. And you're going to hear evidence, and Ms. Walker showed you some overhead photos of where this occurred, the ranch where this occurred. It was out in the middle of nowhere. It's a remote area. There is no cell phone service out there, not for miles. It's a place that is so remote. There are no neighbors. There's no other buildings. You have to drive for miles before you reach anyone or anything. And that's where Mr. Cummings found himself on February 29th, 2020. Because as you heard from Ms. Walker, and you will hear in the evidence, Mr. Cummings was looking to purchase some land. He grew up in New Mexico, Los Alamos to be specific. He grew up here. He spent his childhood in New Mexico before leaving for Colorado and then Alaska. And then in 2019, he returned to New Mexico. Mr. Cummings is an outdoorsman. He's a man who loves to be out in the wilderness, to be out in remote areas, to live off the land. And so he was looking for a piece of land back home here in New Mexico where he could build a home, start a new life. And Mr. Ariola owned property that was what he was looking for. This property out there, out near San Luis, San Ysidro area, near Cabazon Peak, remote, beautiful land. So Mr. Cummings and Mr. Ariola were planning this real estate transaction. And Mr. Cummings was excited about his future. And you're going to hear evidence about this real estate contract that they were negotiating. And Mr. Cummings had every intention of buying that land. And in the meantime, he was permitted to stay out there. He put his RV out there, and he was allowed to stay in this little trailer. Mr. Ariola encouraged him to stay out there, encouraged him to get to know the land, the property, the trailer. There's some horses out there. Mr. Cummings was helping take care of the horses, feeding them. And that's what led up to this incident on February 29th. Mr. Cummings was staying there, as he had been told and encouraged to do, when Mr. Ariola showed up.
Well, to be
He
fair,
showed up unexpectedly.
the playback is sped up. That's on me.
Mr. Cummings and Mr. Ariola started talking about this real estate contract,
Because I want to catch up.
and they started arguing. It was a verbal argument in the kitchen of this small trailer. And while they were arguing, all of a sudden, Mr. Ariola attacked Mr. Cummings. Without any warning, Mr. Cummings was all of a sudden fighting for his life. Mr. Ariola and Mr. Cummings were in this physical altercation. It led down this very short hallway to a small bedroom. And it was during this physical altercation
It's too soon
that
for the
Mr. Cummings realized that Mr. Ariola had something in his right hand. You're going to hear testimony Mr. Ariola was right-handed. You're going to hear testimony that Mr. Ariola routinely carried a canister of mace with him. Mr. Cummings didn't know exactly what it was, but all he knew was that he was being struck with this thing in Mr. Ariola's hand over and over again. During this altercation,
Looks pretty cool.
Mr. Cummings was able to grab his rifle that he had sitting there. He had recently purchased a scope and was putting the scope onto the rifle, which is why it was sitting there. He grabbed the rifle, and he and Mr. Ariola started fighting over this rifle. And it was during this struggle, Mr. Cummings has one hand on this rifle. He has his other hand blocking, his left hand blocking Mr. Ariola, who's repeatedly striking him. During this struggle between these two men, all of a sudden, Mr. Cummings realized that his eyes were starting to burn, his lungs were starting to burn. Something had been sprayed. He didn't know what this stuff was. But at the same time, he starts to feel this burning sensation. He feels Mr. Ariola pulling on the rifle. They're fighting over control over this gun. Whoever wins is going to live. Whoever loses was going to die. And during the struggle over this gun, the cap on the scope of the rifle comes off. And that's important. You're going to see the evidence. You're going to see photos of that cap. That cap had been taped onto the scope with electrical tape. Mr. Cummings had taped the cap on with electrical tape, so it was on there good. And you'll see photos, and you're going to see the evidence that shows that the cap from that scope ended up underneath Mr. Ariola's body. because it came off during a physical fight for control of that gun. During this struggle for the gun, shots went off. You're going to see photos of bullet holes in the trailer. That is important because those bullet holes, or we call them impact sites, a lot of times that's what we refer to them as, those impact sites tell the story of what really happened in that trailer. And you're going to hear from an expert who's going to explain that to you. But some of those bullets sprayed down the hallway and out of the trailer. Three bullets went out the trailer on the other side of the trailer from where the small bedroom was. And that shows how this fight was progressing and continuing as these men are fighting each other for control of this gun. They end up in a small bedroom, and Mr. Cummings ends up basically trapped in that room.
How are we?
Mr. Ariola's in front of him. The only way for him to escape is through Mr. Ariola. And you're going to see other impact sites on the floor in that bedroom, and those impact sites are really important. And you're going to have an expert who's going to explain to you why those impact sites are so important. And the reason that those impact sites are so critical is because what they're going to show you is that at some point during that struggle, the gun that ultimately killed Mr. Ariola, that firearm was upside down, almost on the ground when it went off. Again, the evidence will show that that gun was upside down, literally almost on the ground when 2 shots were fired. That shows you that there was a physical fight, a struggle occurring over that firearm.
This is a fascinating case, factually. It really is.
You're going to see that firearm. It's going to be in this courtroom. You're going to have a chance to look at it. And it's important that you take a close look at that firearm. Technology.
There's a light. There you go. It'll get going.
Is there a way to zoom in?
Those lights. There you go. The top and that one.
There you go.
There we go. This is a photo of that gun that was taken by an investigator with the Office of the Medical Investigator. What you're looking at there, this is the AR-15 that was involved in this struggle. What you see there is some kind of residue or spatter that dried on that firearm that is consistent with Mr. Cummings' story that something was sprayed at him that day during that struggle while they're fighting over that gun. You're going to be able to look at that firearm when it's in this courtroom. So those are the 2 important things about that firearm that the evidence is going to show. 1, this residue or spatter that dried on the gun. And 2, that the muzzle created those marks on the floor, showing that that gun was literally on the floor or almost on the floor when it went off at least twice. You're going to hear evidence from Dr. Gerald with the Office of the Medical Investigator, as Ms. Walker indicated. Officer Gerald conducted the autopsy of Mr. Ariola. And there's a couple of important details that she's going to tell you about what that autopsy revealed. First, the trajectory of those bullets. Mr. Ariola was shot and killed by 2 bullets. Both of those bullets entered in a right to left trajectory, one through his temple and downward, and ended up in his chest. The other one entered on the right side of his chest and went through and exited on the left side. So those 2 bullets, both right to left in a downward trajectory. Dr. Gerald will be testifying to that, and you'll probably see some photographs that also help to demonstrate some of that. The other thing that she's going to tell you is that Mr. Ariola was intoxicated at the time of this altercation. He was intoxicated on alcohol. He had cocaine in his system, and he had marijuana in his system. And Dr. Gerald will explain to you the significance of that combination of alcohol and cocaine when it's in someone's system at the same time. You're going to see photographs that detail the scene. And again, I explained, you're going to see photographs of those impact sites that tell you the story of what happened in that trailer. the impact sites that go down the hall out of the trailer, the other impact sites next to Mr. Ariola's body that show that the gun was on the floor when it went off. And you're going to also hear testimony from an expert by the name of Aaron Brudenell. Mr. Brudenell is a forensic scientist who has spent decades working with the Arizona Department of Public Safety. He is a forensic scientist. His full-time job is working for the prosecution in Arizona. He analyzes crime scenes, especially when there are firearms involved, and he reconstructs shootings. He took the evidence that was gathered by the New Mexico State Police and the Sandoval County Sheriff's Department. He took that evidence and he examined it and he reconstructed what happened in that trailer that day. Mr. Brudenell is going to testify that he closely examined those impact sites that I've just briefly described for you. And he's going to tell you that the physical evidence that he saw is consistent with some kind of physical struggle occurring over that firearm. So at the end of this trial, there is not going to be a dispute about the fact that Mr. Cummings did shoot and kill Mr. Ariola. And the evidence is going to show that he acted in self-defense. The evidence is also going to show that he did not conceal his identity at any point in time. In fact, the evidence will show that he placed a 911 call to the police, identifying himself and explaining what had just happened in that trailer. The state has also charged Mr. Cummings with tampering with evidence. I'm just going to briefly address what the evidence is in that. The state is going to ask you to convict him of tampering with evidence because he washed his face, washed his hands, and removed his clothing after this incident occurred. However, what did Mr. Cummings do with that evidence? What did he do with his clothing? Well, the prosecution's own witnesses are going to testify that Mr. Cummings put his clothes on the back of his pickup truck. And the prosecution's own witnesses are going to tell you that when the police arrived on scene, he told them where his clothing was. He asked them to collect his clothing and test it for whatever he had just been sprayed with. So the evidence is going to show that Mr. Cummings acted in self-defense, that he did not tamper with evidence, and that he did not conceal his identity. That is what this evidence will show. Thank you.
I have this sped up. I feel like I need to defend the honor of the attorneys. This is playing a little fast because I'm behind.
The state will now present its evidence.
Just a little
bit. The state
bit.
has presented its evidence. The defendant may present evidence, but it's not required to do so because the burden is always on the state to prove defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. State, you may call your first witness.
Your Honor, the state will call Deputy Hayden Walker.
Well, eventually we'll catch up, and then I don't know what happens. It might just all implode,
Are you going to address a witness?
or it'll just revert to normal speed. I don't know.
Another 90 degrees.
There we go.
Deputy, before you take the stand, I'll need to swear you in. Raise your right hand, please.
Yeah, we're gonna-
Do you
no,
swear?
No, we don't need that. No, we don't need that. No.
Do you swear that your testimony you're about to give is the truth on the
Looks like we're currently about 7 minutes behind.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Could you please start by telling us and spelling your first and last name?
My first name is spelled Hayden. My last name is spelled Walker.
And where are you currently employed?
I'm working for a personal friend.
Okay. So are you working in law enforcement currently?
No, ma'am.
Were you previously employed by the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you involved in a trouble?
How long total did you work for the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office?
Approximately 2 years.
And prior to that employment, had you been employed with any other law enforcement agency?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell us about that?
So in 2014, I started with the Lee County Sheriff's Department. And 2016, I worked with the Hobbs Police Department.
And so I guess I should just call you Mr. Walker, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Sounds funny. I can't call you deputy now. So, Mr. Walker, were you on duty February 29th of 2020?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell us what shift you were working?
I believe I was working swing shift.
And what hours are swing shift?
To my memory, it's from 2 p.m. to midnight.
Okay. And while you were on duty on February 29th of 2020, did you receive a call to go to a remote area near Cabazon Peak?
Yes, ma'am.
And Can you describe the nature of the call that you received or the call out?
From my recollection, it involved a possible shooting. It was not confirmed, but the call came out as a shooting.
Now, when you excuse me, when you were working, did you wear a uniform and a badge of office?
Yes, ma'am.
And what kind of vehicle did you drive?
A marked Dodge Ram pickup truck.
And did you drive alone or did you have a partner with you?
I drove by myself.
Can you tell us approximately what time you got the call to go out to that area?
May I refresh my memory?
Would looking at your report help refresh your memory?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a copy of your report with you?
No, ma'am.
May I approach the witness? Yeah, can you yes. No,
You may, Ms. Moore.
approach right now. Apologize, I get some kind of training throat, so just take a second to review that thing. And then after you're done, let me know if that refreshes your memory about what time you received that call,
It was approximately 1740 hours,
which is what time is it?
5:40 p.m.
Okay. So after you received the call, did you proceed straight to the location?
Yes, ma'am.
And where was this location?
So the best directions that we had was near Cabazon Peak Road, and I believe there was some GPS coordinates provided.
Technically,
And
it's out
there's a
in
road called Cerro Los Pinos, and that area is kind of, I mean, it's not very well marked, but in that general vicinity.
And when you went out to the location, did you meet up with someone?
Yes,
Do you recall who that was?
I believe his name was David McCullough.
Okay, and when you met up with David McCullough, did he assist you in locating the residence where the shooting had occurred?
Yes.
And how did that happen? Did you go together? Did you follow him there? Did he ride with you?
He's gonna do this
To my
thing.
knowledge, there was myself,
Yeah,
Deputy
yeah.
Honey Estiwa, and Sergeant Crespin. And I believe Mr. McCullough rode in Deputy Crespin's patrol unit towards the rear. And I was at the lead of the convoy, I guess you could say, and utilizing the radio, he provided directions to Sergeant Crespin, who relayed them to me.
Okay, so approximately how long or how far was it from the point where you met up with Mr. McCullough and when you got to the actual location of the shooting?
Approximately 4 miles, I believe.
Okay. And when as you were driving up to the location, what did you observe?
I believe the road split off to, it continued south, and then it branched off to the west, so it would have been like a right-hand turn. I was informed that we were near the location, near the residence, but our view was kind of obstructed due to the terrain. So we kind of like set up there to kind of make sure we had all our resources in place before approaching the residence.
Okay. So how long did you wait there before you made sure you had all the resources you needed?
Maybe a couple minutes.
Okay. So if I understand you right, then did some other deputies arrive at your location to assist?
To my knowledge, people were having difficulty finding us. There's no cell phone reception in that area.
Okay.
So I know my phone wasn't working, and we were kind of in a depression. So our radio communication, like, we'd have to send somebody to the top of the hill. So I think we kind of came to the decision, like, hey, just based off the fact that there's a potential shooting victim, we need to approach the scene as hastily as possible while still maintaining safety. So I think waiting for more people was kind of out of the option because we were given an ETA of hours for state police to show up.
Okay. Now at that point, did you know the condition of any victim, whether that a person was alive or not alive?
So at the time, like I said, it was a possible shooting. We had no direct witness to said event, to my knowledge, from what Mr. McCullough had seen. And so, I mean, in law enforcement, we get calls like hoax calls all the time. So at the time, we were using best practices and trying to make sound judgment decisions.
Okay. So at some point you drove up closer to the ranch?
No, I believe we stayed where the Y intersection was at.
Okay. And what did you observe when you got there?
So around this time, it was dark, and I remember seeing some lights that were headed towards our direction, which in this area, it's very, I mean, hardly any people live out there. It's very sparsely populated. So I saw the lights coming towards our location. I believed it was coming from the residence.
Okay. Could you actually, was it dark yet when you got out there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So other than the lights of the vehicle approaching, did you see any other lights besides those of the officers?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so when you saw the lights of the vehicle approaching, what did you do?
We have it's called a PA, a public announcement system. I began giving verbal commands over the PA to try to establish contact with the person from a distance.
Okay, what did you say? More or less, I mean, not verbatim, but
I mean,
what kind of commands were you giving?
just basic commands of stop your vehicle, turn it off, get out.
I
stuff like that.
guess so.
Okay, and did the
It
vehicle stop
surprises
immediately?
me.
Yes,
Okay, and how many people exited that vehicle?
just one.
Okay, and is the individual that you saw, do you see him in the courtroom here somewhere?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you point him out and describe an article of clothing that he's wearing?
He has on a blue mask, and from my view, it looks like a black or dark navy jacket sitting in between the two women.
What's up, brother?
Could the record reflect that the witness is identified?
How are you doing? What the
Scuffle
heck?
over a gun and a
Mr.
dead
Walker,
guy.
After the defendant
It
exited
pits
the vehicle,
Areola versus
what did you do
Cummings. I'm
next?
not making this up.
I continued
Yeah,
giving
I
commands
heard
to
that.
approach us.
A little
Like I
bit of
said, we
it,
were trying to
but
get
I have
position
no idea what the background
advantage.
of this is.
So I had him come to us, and I gave him verbal commands. Essentially, in law enforcement, for safety purposes, we'll have somebody like lay them on the ground and have them put their arms out to safely restrain them.
I'm sure Chad has done a
he
fantastic
comply?
job
Yes.
using innuendo.
Did you do any sort of search of Mr. Cummings?
I
the
just ran
defendant?
across this and just did it immediately.
Just a basic
I wasn't interested.
pat down for weapons.
It's pretty
Did you
cool.
find any weapons on him?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so after
You need to let
that
go
was
of the masks
completed,
out there
what
in
did you do
New
then?
Mexico.
I secured him in my patrol unit.
Okay, and when he was secured in the back of your patrol unit, what did you do after that?
Mr. Cummings was asking a lot of questions like, hey, why are you doing this to me? And I was trying to explain to him, like, this is protocol, given the severity of the type of call. And he basically told us that he had acted in self-defense
Mhm.
and
Hello?
he was harmed by some sort of neurological agent.
Oh, come on. How can you not make
Yes.
a joke
Okay.
with that sort of a
And when
caption?
he told you he had been harmed, what did you do?
I asked him if he needed medical assistance.
And did he respond?
No.
Excuse me. To your knowledge, was were medical personnel dispatched to the location to examine the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
And who was that?
I believe it was the Navajo Nation's Medical Service.
And they did that while you were present?
It might have been in the company of another deputy,
Okay,
but I was kind of in the area.
okay. So what was your next step after that?
So my next step was, okay, is there potentially somebody who's injured that we need to render medical aid to? So
Welcome to
our
Law
next priority
Talk with John,
became
folks.
potentially locating a injured person.
Mhm.
So we, in law enforcement, it's called the security sweep. Basically, we went to go secure the scene and check for any victims.
And when you say the scene, was there, help the jury understand, was there some sort of residence there on that property?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a big ranch style property, I guess. Like there's a fence, and to my knowledge, I want to say there's like some like sheds, like some overhanging structures where somebody might keep horses. There was a RV camper, and there was a small little house in the middle.
So who besides yourself went in to do the protective sweep inside that residence?
Myself and Deputy Honey Estiwa.
Okay. And describe what you observed when you entered the residence.
So whenever I entered the residence, I remember we were
I
standing
asked
out at the
before,
doors
but
that we
can
had
somebody
opposite.
give me like the 30-second like?
And
scoop
I
of
saw a
what the
bathroom
hell
in the kitchen
we're
area.
arguing over.
And I went into the bathroom and kitchen area, and Deputy Honey Estiwa went to the other side where he informed me that he had saw a male on the
My
ground.
understanding is that it
What
was
going
an
on to
accidental
result in the male that's on the
shooting.
ground?
Basically, is the argument of the defense.
So
I
after
only
you
saw the
finished your
defense's
protective
argument.
sweep, what did you do after that?
So we exited the residence, we secured it, and we continued clearing the rest of the property. And then after we determined that there was no outstanding suspects or any potential threats, we went back to our patrol units and waited for additional deputies to respond.
So did you have any part in, I don't know, securing the scene is right, but setting up the perimeter and controlling?
All right, I
entry and
think I
exit?
just set my.
No, so it's, like I said, it's a very rural area. I believe there's just the one roadway to the property. So where we were set up at, we were able to maintain the security pretty well.
Okay. Now, did you on that day have any sort of lapel recorder on that you were activated, or excuse me, that you were wearing that was activated?
Like a body camera?
Yes.
No body camera.
Did
but
you
I
have
had
any sort of audio recorder?
Yes, a pocket recorder.
Okay. And did you turn that on at any point during your
Yes,
Okay, when did you turn it on?
Catastrophic. I was asked if I
probably
would
right before I was going on scene.
take care of the stream, and I will.
And what happened to that audio recording after your part in this investigation was complete?
I uploaded it to the Sandoval County's server as part of our evidence procedure.
And have you had an opportunity since that day to review a portion of that audio recording?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I don't know what.
What are you looking back for? Are you unprepared?
Mr. Walker, I want to hand you listed mark as State's Exhibit 13. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And there appears to be.
And in fairness, Cactus, I actually
Yes, that is my
I can
signature.
see myself, and I do look
Yes.
pretty injured today.
Today.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to play this about a 5-minute segment.
You may.
I don't do technology. We might need your IT person if it doesn't work. Your Honor, I'm sorry, I think this has been stipulated to, correct? Yeah, we're not objecting.
No, no, we don't need that.
Hopefully
Fingers crossed.
we get audio. Plug this.
Mr. Walker, if you could listen to it, because I might have a couple of questions about it afterwards.
Okay.
Face away from us, please. Face away.
Oh my
Let's get the
god.
documents heard. All right, spin around for us. Continue to lift your shirt up. Okay, all right. All right, now face away from us. Drop down to your knees. All right, lay face down on the ground, okay? We understand that we have to follow our procedures, okay? All right, now lift your arms up like an airplane. All right, remain in that position.
They don't have the technology to play the video. Brenda, I wish I could, but I can't from my end.
Thank you.
We understand that, sir. We have to follow our policies. Okay. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have anything else on your person? Any pocket knives? Anything
He
like
said anything objectionable.
And you said nobody else is out here with you?
There's a gentleman that came down. My dad's just up the road.
Okay. Where's your dad at?
Just up the road about a mile. He called me from Amazon, so he's right there.
Okay. What
No one's out there on the premises.
Okay. What kind of vehicle is it? Your dad?
He's in a Toyota Rab.
Okay. What color?
Blue.
Okay. Okay, this one? Wait,
Who you guys with?
Sandoval County Sheriff's Office. So where's the firearm at?
I put it on the porch.
The porch of the resident?
Yeah, so you guys can deal with
Okay.
it.
And where's the subject at?
He's inside the house.
Inside the house?
Yep.
Okay.
And there is whatever he jammed in my face, he admitted some sort of, I don't know what it was, chlorophyll or something.
Okay. Do you need
So
an
the
ambulance?
house,
Do you need an ambulance?
I'm pretty mad getting out of the house. And I went and washed my face off.
All right, we're gonna set you up. All right, tuck your knees under your legs. All right, we're gonna lift you up, okay? All right, we're gonna get this up. We're gonna take this up. So which road is your dad sitting down? This one? Okay. All right, so they said that your dad is.
It has happened. Extremely rare.
Investigation page, you got everything by the books, all right? So if you are legitimately defending yourself, okay, we have to preserve the scene, we have to preserve the evidence, we have to do everything by the books to show that, right? Right, so I mean, everybody gets the same investigation. I understand this is, you know, yeah,
that's what I was gonna say.
Can I give you a layout, guys? You know what you're looking at?
Sure.
So, my truck's in the way, so
Right.
you'll have to probably drive out here to put it down. And then you go in, and it's the bar trailer.
Okay,
And you'll
bar
see-
trailer. So
you'll
what
see my-
color is the trailer?
You'll see my rifle on the porch.
Okay, what
You'll
kind
see
of?
that from the distance.
Okay,
I put the clip, I put the rifle there.
so what color is your trailer?
The trailer, I was communicating the guy to buy it, but he, it's light blue.
Okay, light blue trailer.
There's an
So
RV.
is there anybody else on any of the other
No,
properties?
no.
Okay,
So there's an RV and the bricks on it,
okay.
and then, you go in and then.
Yeah, hang on one second. Hang on one second. Dude, what's the address here? You know?
You know, I don't know. It doesn't have one, I don't think. It doesn't do delivery or anything.
Oh, really? So you don't have like an actual address here?
No, I'm very new to the property, so I don't know if there is.
Okay.
It's, I hand it to you.
Okay.
You gotta put that.
Okay. Thank you.
And,
Okay. All right.
did you see the device in his hand?
I didn't clear that room. The other deputy did, but so.
We're just here to secure,
make sure everything's all right. So.
Mr. Walker, it sounded like he was asking you a question about whether you saw something. Did you hear that?
Yes.
What was he asking you?
He asked if I saw a device in his hand, I believe.
In the decedent's hand?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you said you hadn't gone back there, right?
No.
Let me ask you this. When you observed Mr. Cummings, the defendant, did you observe any kind of injuries on him?
No.
Any scratches or bruises or anything?
Please stand by the microphone. This is the one thing that drives me nuts.
Have you received drug recognition?
This is interesting in that
Okay.
I don't know how it's going to turn out.
Appears to be red or watery.
It's not immediately obvious to me.
I don't necessarily know either, because if the argument is that, what, was it an accidental discharge?
Was correct.
Correct.
Is that the defense?
They were fighting.
Did you attempt to find out what his identity?
So it's sort of a self-defense
So
too. Like,
my
hey, if you
main
get
role
control of the
as
gun, you
responder
kill me.
as a
If not,
deputy to go out
I
there
kill
and
you.
secure the scene.
That's where we're at.
Like I said, I didn't go see where the decedent was at because I don't want to contaminate.
I gotta go back to the state's
my main concern
opening
was,
arguments before I give
any
an opinion.
possible suspects in securing the scene. So,
I mean, this is just different than Brooks in that we knew who did it, and we knew they were guilty.
Well,
It's interesting watching it play out, but there was no drama on that level.
Yeah, but in this case, we know who did it and we know what happened.
to my knowledge, he did not want to.
It's just a question of what the legal defense would be.
I will pass the witness, Your Honor. I'm going to leave this in case you need it.
I don't think anybody necessarily disputes what actually transpired. The question was there an intentional homicide or not?
That's a fair question, Kay. I'm guessing self-defense is usually an affirmative defense, although I'm not sure. I don't do it, but I'm sure that was raised. It was brought up in the opening argument by his attorney.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Walker. How are you?
Doing good, ma'am. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Let me back up for a minute, okay?
Sorry.
I'm going to back up and ask you some preliminary questions.
Okay.
What year did you begin your law enforcement career?
2014.
And in 2014, did I hear you say you worked for the Lee County Sheriff's Department?
Yes, ma'am.
How long did you work there?
2.5 years.
And where'd you go after that?
Hobbs Police Department.
So did you start there? in
Accidental
2016?
discharge could be an argument.
How long did you
I
work for
mean,
Hobbs?
if the whole, because I was hearing from the defense that he dropped the gun and that
And then
it
you left Hobbs?
fired
Yes.
Where'd you go when you
without
left
him
Hobbs?
necessarily pulling the
County Sheriff's
trigger.
Office.
How long did you work
That's
there?
a question of fact that's sort of
Approximately 2 years,
interesting.
maybe a little less than.
So what year would you have started in Sandoval County?
To my knowledge, it was November 2018, I believe.
And then did you leave 2020?
Yes.
So that would be the year of this investigation?
Yes.
And where'd you go then?
Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department.
And how long were you there?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a good argument, Vanguard,
you're no
but
longer in law
it's an
enforcement,
argument.
Yes.
Okay. Now,
When your client's guilty, you'll latch onto anything.
on February 29th of 2020, that's when you get dispatched, is that right?
Yes.
And
you understand at the time that you're getting dispatched that you are being dispatched to a possible homicide.
Yes.
You have the best chat in the business, my friend.
You ran an audio recording device. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm giving her all
Now,
she's
it's my
got, Rabbit.
understanding that you actually had some type of a camera, but for some reason you didn't use it. Is that correct?
Yes.
So why didn't you use the camera?
Because it did not work.
The camera didn't work.
Yes, ma'am.
How long had the camera not worked?
For several months.
And had you gone to any of your supervisors and told them that your camera didn't work?
Multiple times.
And did they ever replace your camera?
I was told there was not money to replace the cameras.
Yeah, like we don't care.
So you run your audio recording device because that is all you have at your disposal. Is that right?
We're in BFE, New Mexico.
And the,
Screw your camera.
small portion of the recording that we heard today, I think, is about 5 minutes. But have you had an opportunity to listen to the entire audio recording that you recorded?
No.
Okay, hang on just a second.
That's what suckered me in, but I'm here for the crazy fact pattern.
It is a crazy fact pattern. And it's also not a great look. Like, by comparison, you see the public officials in Waukesha as compared to how they handle things in New Mexico. It is night and day.
Mr. Walker, do you have any idea how long the entire audio recording is that you recorded on that night?
To my recollection, it's probably an hour and a half long.
An hour and a half. Now, I have listened to the entire hour and a half, and I've never heard you ask him his name.
Guys, I'll repeat. I don't think it's a
Am I
good
wrong?
argument.
Would you like
but
to
it
have an
is
opportunity
argument.
to review it?
I'm not saying that you're wrong.
So, Ms. Romo asked you if you asked him his name and if he refused to give it to you, and you indicated that that occurred. So if that occurred, we heard your recording. We can clearly hear your voice, right?
Yes.
Now, it's harder to hear Mr. Cummings' voice on your recording, right?
When I'm not walking and moving, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to give you an opportunity right now. You can agree with me that you never asked him his name, or we can take a break for an hour and a half, and you can review your entire audio recording and come out and give us your final answer. What would you like to do?
So I guess I didn't ask him his name.
So are you testifying today from your memory, or are you testifying based on a conversation that you had with someone at the district attorney's office? Where is your testimony coming from?
From my memory.
But you didn't take the time to actually sit and review your audio recording, right?
So I have listened to it. As far as in entirety recently, no, ma'am.
Since the date of incident on February 29th, 2020,
Seriously,
have
I'd
you
be
listened
objecting
to
here.
the entire recording?
Yes.
When was that?
After the incident, when I was typing my report.
So what day would that have been?
I'd object there, but I would expect to lose.
So have you listened to the audio recording that you made anytime within the last 2.5 years?
No.
Now, by the time you show up there to the area, the first person you make contact with is Mr. McCullough, right?
Yes.
And how much time do you spend with Mr. McCullough? Do you recall?
Not a very long time.
What does that mean to you? Was it minutes? Was it 10 minutes? An hour?
Minutes approximately.
Okay. And after speaking to Mr. McCullough, you went kind of with Mr. McCullough to this area where the ranch was. Is that right?
Yes.
So how long do you think it took you before you made contact with Mr. Cummings?
You gotta give it to her. She is a brutally effective cross-examiner.
It's a rough road, so I would probably guess maybe 30 minutes to an hour.
30 minutes to an hour from what time?
May I refresh my memory?
Sure. Would something refresh your memory?
Everybody has their own style. I like walking people into traps. That's what's fun for me. Some people just come at it with a sledgehammer. I don't know, Mike. What is your opinion? I think she's doing a fantastic cross-examination, particularly since the other side doesn't
Oh.
object.
Yeah, and it depends on the facts and the case and the particular witness and what you think they're going to respond to. It's more art than science.
Yeah, that's true. And he's folding like a paper bag.
He's backing
Yes.
up a
He's
little.
holding himself, but he is helping.
So walk us through this timeline a little bit.
So approximately 25 minutes
From when?
from making contact with Mr. McCullough to making contact with Mr. Cummings.
Okay. So 25 minutes from the time that you made contact with McCullough to the time that you made contact with Cummings.
Yes.
And when did you receive the dispatch call to head out to Cabazon Peak?
I believe it was at 5:40 p.m.
I'm a nice guy.
You to get out there and make your contact.
Oh
with
God,
Mr.
that's
McCullough.
gonna get clipped.
Approximately 26, or I apologize. I don't want to give a specific time, but I know that I was coming from Cuba and I was driving with my emergency lights and sirens activated. So drive time from Cuba to that location. If you'd let me refresh my memory, I could give you more specific time frame.
What would refresh your memory?
My police report.
Yeah, she's all cranky about it. All right, have your police report.
So
You should have all this
46
memorized.
minutes.
I mean, we know that he was prepped beforehand, so he's read it a dozen times before he actually stepped up
And
to
then
the
it takes you
stand.
another 25 minutes before you're able to make contact with Mr. Cummings.
Yes.
Okay. And you don't know what time the shooting occurred, correct?
No, ma'am.
All right. Now, before you arrive out there, you already have some information about what's going on, right? Let me ask you this. Isn't it true that you're receiving updated information on your CAD system?
Yes.
Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what a CAD is?
Actually, I'd like to, from my memory, I don't believe that we had an up-to-date CAD system at Sandoval County Sheriff's Office at the time of this incident.
What do you mean?
What was this? This was
So,
2015. How did you
Some
not have a
agencies
CAD
have
system?
computer-assisted dispatch, and I do not believe Sandoval County had a computer-assisted dispatch at the time.
So let me ask you this. Who is communicating to you when you're out in your car telling you where to go and what to do?
Dispatch.
And so how are you receiving that information?
A radio?
And are you receiving it on a computer also?
To my knowledge, I was not.
But you're receiving it over the radio.
Yes.
And what you're receiving over the radio is.
Correct me if
a
I'm wrong, but
written
this was
record of it.
2015,
Whether
right?
you received it at that moment on your computer or not, a written record of it is made, correct?
That would be through the dispatch system, to my knowledge.
Right. But look, isn't it true that at 5:50 p.m. you receive information from dispatch?
Oh,
that
that's
says,
even worse.
Cummings,
2019 or
phone number
2020? Jesus, they don't have a CAD system?
9788 claiming he was attacked, tried to defend himself, and shot the individual dead. You received that information, did you not?
If dispatch related over the radio, yes.
Yes. So before you ever arrived, you knew his name. They had already given you his name, and they had already told you what was going on. You had that information, correct?
So when I received the call, I began responding to the area with my emergency lights and sirens activated. I am traveling as fast as my patrol unit will go, which is approximately 105 miles per hour. I do not have time to remember every detail. There's cars that I'm avoiding. I have to obey traffic laws. I am not taking the time to take notes on all information. I'm trying to get to the scene as fast as I can.
Of course, I have no expectation that you would take notes. My point is, there's a reason that I don't hear you ask on the audio recording what his name was. You already had it. Mr. McCullough already had it, right?
So we did not have a computer-assisted dispatch, and also the phone was not working. So I don't see how I'm going to
Setting up the rush to
when I
judgment.
get to the scene. I see what you're saying, but if
But
there's
here it
no
actually makes
internet
sense,
signal,
as opposed to
I'm not
Brooks.
going to be able to receive this information in real time, and I'm also not going to be able to call dispatch and ask them questions.
Dispatch. Oh, all right, let's back up.
She's setting up the argument. They decided he was guilty before they went. Okay.
You are still able to hear the radio
You
communication
determined
as you're driving
the
in your car, right?
perpetrator before you actually investigated.
When you're driving 105 miles per hour
It
in a
happens.
Ram with air resistance over the light bars and sirens, it is very difficult to hear every radio transmission. If I heard it, I do not recall.
All right. Are you disputing that the dispatcher said Dean Cummings, with his phone number, claiming he was attacked, tried to defend himself, and shot the individual dead? Are you denying that that came out over your radio?
I'm not denying that. I'm saying perhaps I did not hear it.
But you agree with me, just so we're clear, that nowhere on that audio recording did you ask him his name?
Correct.
Asked and answered. You established it.
Was there some point in time when you separated yourself from your recording device?
Yes.
When was that?
They don't have the
So,
same budget for
whenever we
prosecution.
secured Mr. Cummings in the backseat of my patrol unit, I don't have a recording device in my patrol unit that works.
I do think
made the
she's
decision to leave my pocket
doing a nice
recorder
job.
inside my patrol unit while I went
Oh, I absolutely think she's doing a
Now,
fantastic
whether I
job.
was
I think
vigilant-
that,
But that doesn't mean I
prosecution
wouldn't
did a terrible
object
job
to a
of
bunch
shutting
of
it
it if I
down.
was
Like
prosecution.
I said, there was a lot of moving pieces, but I figured for the integrity of the case, it was better that I left my pocket recorder where Mr. Cummings was at while I performed the security sweep.
So let me understand this. You leave your pocket recorder where Mr. Cummings is,
On my passenger seat of my patrol unit, yes, ma'am.
and Mr. Cummings was in your unit.
In the back seat, yes, ma'am.
Who was staying with Mr. Cummings when you were not in your unit?
Deputy Crispine,
So,
Sergeant Crispine. my
so
apologies.
your audio recorder
There's
was
no way to
recording even though you
make this
weren't
case
there.
not sound dirty on top of everything else.
No, that is a fair point.
So you separated yourself from the recording device, but you didn't separate the recording device from
Mr. Cummings was in your unit? Seriously?
That is correct.
Okay.
I think she's doing a
So-
fantastic job. And by the way, that was dirty.
There
And
wasn't
shame on
any
you.
point in time where he was saying things that aren't recorded.
So, if you look at the time frame of the call, my pocket
His credibility is tanking right now.
why it's at an hour and a half duration, and not for the entirety of the incident.
Is this a jury trial?
But that doesn't happen for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So, whenever we cleared the property, like I said, it's a very large property. I don't know how long it took us to clear it, but it took a long time. I remember I was physically exhausted after searching the premises.
But your recording device ran the entire time that you were clearing the property.
Yes, but was not on me.
It wasn't on you.
So I don't remember exactly when I took it off my person, but I remember that I left it with Mr. Cummings and separated
I
myself.
was going to say, David, today is
And
Tuesday.
on
You're
the
drunk. Go
recording
home.
device, on the audio recording, we can hear you go and clear the residence, and we can hear you come back, right? Or do you not know because you haven't reviewed it?
I was waiting on the second PTI from your office to review it.
I don't understand second PTI.
So I had a PTI hearing with your office, I believe.
Mhm.
And I was told that there would be a second PTI where you requested that I listen to it second per second, and I never received notification for that.
There was a discussion during your interview about the
I
fact
can't
that you
believe they're
only had your
doing this
recording-
in
your
testimony
recording device.
in front of a jury.
Right,
But we're 2.5 years into the case now.
right. And I also.
Why would they let them get away with this?
Okay. So
You can't talk about the pretrial procedure and what.
No, you're not supposed to be able to. Why is there no objection?
now,
I don't know.
I'm like losing it.
Mr. Cummings was completely
My
cooperative.
mind's about to
Correct.
break if they don't object at some point.
He followed all of your commands. Correct?
Yes.
You asked him
Speculation.
numerous questions, and he answered
Calls for
all
legal
of your questions,
conclusion.
even though he didn't have
Jesus.
to. Correct?
I think if you're,
Sometimes he didn't answer directly to the question, but he did speak on some.
I think if your objection gets overruled in New Mexico, they get to tase
What-
you.
What are you referring?
That's the only thing I can think of.
I asked him if he needed an ambulance. He
Or
didn't
you get shipped
answer
off
that
to Area
question.
51.
Affirmative, yes or no.
Well, that's not really what the audio recording bears out.
New Mexico.
Isn't it true that some of his answers are inaudible because your recording device isn't close enough to him, right?
Objection, compound.
So we could hear.
I'll start
on the
objecting for her.
recording that Ms. Romo played for you. We could hear you ask if he needed an ambulance.
Objection.
Twice.
The
second
attorney is
time, the
testifying.
first part of what he says we can't hear, and then we can hear him say, I had to wash my face. Correct?
That is not a yes or a no.
Objection. Facts not in evidence, and it's not an actual question.
Okay. So it's not like he was ignoring you. And the inaudible portions of that recording, do you remember what he says?
It was over 2 years ago. No, ma'am.
Right. So if there's a portion of the transcript that's inaudible, you don't recall what he said, do you?
Welcome back to Law Talk with Chubb.
So just to be clear,
Nick, I'm never going to relax when it comes to bullshit. Hello, Tammy.
well, what I'm flipping through here, in case you need to refresh your memory with it, I'm flipping through a transcript of the audio recording. Your Honor,
I am the nicest person on earth you could ever meet until I go into lawyer mode, and then things change. I think many people have seen that. She is demolishing his credibility.
One of the very first things that Mr. Cummings told you when you had contact with him is he said, I'm not armed, right?
To my knowledge, yes.
You asked him, where's the firearm at, correct?
Yes.
And he gave you a very direct answer. He said, I put it on the porch, right?
Yep.
You said, where is the subject at? And he gave you a very direct answer. He said, he's inside the house, right?
I love you, Saint.
Yes.
You're one of the best.
You asked him, what color is the trailer? And he tries to answer you. Part of it's inaudible, but you're able to clear it up. You say, what color is your trailer? He says it's light blue, right?
If that's what's on the pocket recorder, yes.
If you need to refresh your memory, I'm happy to show you this.
You also asked a hearsay question, and nobody objected.
You ask him, is there
in order to
anybody else
introduce
on any
evidence.
of the other properties? He says no, correct?
That is correct.
What is the prosecution doing here?
You asked him, is your residence unlocked, sir? He said yes. You asked, do you have any dogs or anything? He said no dogs, right?
Yes.
You didn't lay the foundation for it coming in as evidence. Jesus
Now,
fuck.
if you recall, you had a conversation with Mr. Cummings
But if no one's objecting, it works.
that is on
Obviously.
recording about the clothes that he took off. Do you recall that?
Yes.
He told you that he took his clothes off because he had been sprayed with whatever this man had in his hand, correct?
Yes.
And he told you exactly where the clothes were, right?
Yes.
No, I will never enhance my call.
I think that means just have a drink. I think it's what we're saying here.
And in addition to telling you where the clothes were,
It's only
didn't
6:30.
he also ask you to be sure to preserve them, to put them in a trash bag, he said?
Right.
Okay.
I am desperately
So in no
praying
way
that
did he
somebody
try to hide the
objects.
clothes from you, prevent you from obtaining them. In fact, he did the opposite.
It's gonna
right?
blow.
That is correct.
Anyone object. If you're in the freaking gallery
You asked him
and
what
you're
the
within the
address
power of
was,
my voice, if
told
you're
you that
watching
there
Law
was
Talk
one
with
out
Mike,
there.
object.
That was Deputy.
Please.
You,
Anyone.
asked him what the address was?
Okay, and we're just hearing it on your recording.
Yes.
And you make an important point. You're not the only person speaking to Mr. Cummings right? There's other deputies who are speaking to him at the same time. You're just the only one with a recording device on, correct?
To my knowledge, yes, ma'am.
All right.
We have to have that.
You even asked him if he had a key to his fifth wheel.
I
so
don't
that you
care
could
what
get in
they
it,
object for, but at this point,
without too much
break her
trouble, and
flow.
he directed you to where the
Even
key
if you
was,
get
right?
overruled, I don't
Yes, ma'am.
care. But she's destroying this guy as a witness.
Jay Rabine, go over there.
Let me just
Subscribe. His channel's blowing up, and it should.
Thank you, sir.
One of the things, just to be clear, that we heard on the audio recording is initially when you make contact with Mr. Cummings, he says to you, "I'm devastated." Isn't that what he said?
To me, that part sounded inaudible, but that could have been what he said.
I
If they
don't know.
don't schedule it
I don't
during
know
one of my
They scheduled it
jobs.
the 15th and the 16th, full days.
Would it refresh your memory if you looked at the transcript, or do you want to agree with me?
I mean, your level of hearing is different from mine, so I'm not sure your transcript is accurate with what I would be hearing from my pocket recorder.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and
Yeah, are you free on the
Would
15th and the
it refresh
16th?
your memory if you listen to it again?
Sure.
Okay.
The box fort art was amazing. It really was.
I'm not intending to play an hour and a half.
She said
I'm not intending to be.
I was sent some more stuff that was really cool that was recommended to be put on shirts and things, and I'm considering it. I'm just lazy.
What? Well, we can do it a couple of different, it's part of the short clip that we played for the jury. So we can play that 5-minute clip again because it's in there. Or we can have the gentleman listen to the hour and a half overnight and he can come back tomorrow, whatever everyone prefers. It seems easier that he just listened to the 5-minute clip.
Ms. Romo.
I'm not sure where she's going with it. I mean, if she's going to refer to different parts of this entire interview, which she's been doing, then I think we need to play the whole thing for the jury. She's been referring to this entire alleged transcript of his belt tape, which is way longer than 5 minutes.
All right, this is a little fucked up.
See, I'm going to use Ms. Fowler's word. She now is in a throuple. And not only does she choose to be in a throuple, and she said
5-minute clip that Ms. Romo
Can you actually use the microphone?
They provide him with the 1.5 hour recording, and we'll come back in the morning.
Sure. I don't have a.
I can't really hear it either.
Yeah. I have the recording on my computer.
Thank you, mask and not using an actual microphone.
Sure, he can come to my office and pick it up. It's in Albuquerque.
Okay, let's do this for Ms. Go ahead and have a seat. Let me just read the recent instruction for. It's just been a long day for the jury, so let me read the recent instruction. We'll break until tomorrow.
Dude, law and crime, get your fucking audio engineers in the room and figure this shit out.
Well, to their credit, they probably have limited access. They're fighting. Can we just get in? Period.
During recess.
No, that's fair.
Discuss this case with other jurors or with any other person, or allow anyone else to discuss a case with you or in your presence. You as jurors must decide this case based solely on the evidence presented here within the 4 walls of this courtroom. This means that during the trial, you must not conduct any independent research about the case, the matters in this case, and the individuals or corporations involved in this case. In other words, you should not consult dictionaries or reference materials, search the internet, websites, blogs, or use any other electronic tool to obtain information about this case or to help you decide the case. Do not try to find out information from any source outside the confines of this courtroom. Until you retire to deliberate, you may not discuss a case with anyone, even your fellow jurors. After you retire to deliberate, you may begin discussing the case with your fellow jurors We cannot discuss the case with anyone else until you have returned.
Okay, I'm assuming that's a yes. Okay.
You also must not talk to anyone about this case or use these tools to communicate electronically with anyone about the case. This includes your family and friends. You may not communicate with anyone about the case on your cell phone or through any other device that can access the internet, through email, text messaging, or on Twitter, through any blog or website, through any internet chat room, or by way of any other social networking website such as Facebook. During your deliberations, you must not communicate with or provide any information to anyone by any means about this case.
So are we closing down for the night? Is that what's going on here?
Device or media such as a telephone, cell phone, or any other device that can access the internet.
I muted. I pulled the mic. Yeah, this is standard jury instructions that they're closing for the day. There might be obviously some matters of law afterward, but I think we're pretty much done.
To communicate to anyone any information about this case or to conduct any research about this case until I accept your verdict. Avoid any publicity this case may receive. Do not read, listen to, or watch any news accounts of this trial. Do not express any opinion about this.
Well, you didn't say the cat jumped on his wiener, did you?
Okay, folks, what we're going to do is we're going to recess for the day.
My people have heard these instructions so many times. We got to spice it up.
Oh, I know. I've heard these instructions so many times as well.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, that's a 0.2 just to sit here and do nothing.
And your badges, also leave your badges on your chair.
I forget, you do the plaintiff's side, so you don't deal with the billable hours garbage.
No.
I know one of the jurors wanted to bring coffee, and I will talk.
That's a 0.2 just for sitting in the room.
I just get paid if and when I ring you up. That's it.
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Some days that's awesome. Some days it's horrible.
Well, let me put it this way, 2,000 billable hours doesn't sound ridiculous. It's 50 weeks, 40 hours a day. But the billables requires probably 20 or 25% more time, depending upon what you're doing.
At least, yeah.
Plus actually entering them, which sucks. So for people who do not know, you record every 6 minutes of your day when you are a defense attorney working for defense clients. It's not fun.
So this is it? We're done for the day?
I suppose we are. Are we going to follow this one?
I don't know. Let's have that conversation right now.
All right. So what are your thoughts?
Okay, I seriously got suckered into this mostly because it was an extreme skier.
All right.
Sure, of course.
And I want to go skiing.
I'm not a huge skiing fan. I always was a snowboarder.
You know what a skier said to you snowboarders?
What is it?
Besides, get off the mountain. We say, get a pair.
I'll give you that one. That's funny. That's genuinely funny. Lord, this might be an interesting one. I just don't know enough about it yet, and I gotta take a look at some of the paperwork. I think the facts of it. So, what does this actually have to do with skiing at the end of the day? It seems like it was a domestic violence circumstance where a gun either went off or the guy shot his wife or girlfriend. I don't know. I don't know the background story.
I didn't know anything. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I started watching it, and she started the opening argument, which put me behind. Although I think the video actually caught up. I think we're there in real time by the end. So I put it at like 1.2 or whatever. So it was going a little fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this is interesting. I'm like, all right, why not? Let's stream it. Okay.
Sure.
So I start streaming this thing, and then I'm like, I like didn't plan. Like I had like stuff going on that I didn't even contemplate. And then I throw you an invite. I'm like, come over here and bail me out. I just got into a trial for no reason. Anyway, the whole thing is it had nothing to do with skiing, but then I see I'm like, I don't know what the trial is, but we find out it's a homicide.
Yes.
We see the opening arguments, and we've got to tussle over a gun.
Right.
And the facts, so the prosecutor comes out and says, hey, we know what happened. This guy shot this guy and killed him. And I'm thinking, okay, that's a strong opening. And then the defense attorney came out and said, yep, my client did shoot him. No two ways about it. But here's why. And then I'm like, ooh, this is interesting. They got in a fight, self-defense. They were grappling over the gun. Whoever got the gun was probably going to live, and the other person was going to die.
That was the thing, is like when I was getting into the Uber and before I had to, get here, my understanding is that they're also arguing potentially that it was manufacturer defect, that the weapon fell and it was not intentionally shooting the person. I mean, they have a dozen different arguments that they're trying to make, and I don't know which one they're actually trying to cling to because they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah, that's tough. That's where this one's kind of fun for fact reasons. Now the fact that the names lend themselves to immature humor, that's just a bonus.
Yeah,
I didn't put that in the calculation, but don't worry, I literally didn't notice, but my chat did.
I mean, did Cummings unload his rifle on Areola? We don't necessarily know.
Cummings v. Areola, come on. I mean, it's not that. Of course, it's the people of the state of New Mexico versus Cummings.
No, obviously, but you know what I mean. It's too easy to write. You didn't see that immediately?
I didn't because I literally started. I'm like, what is this? I clicked on it, and then I'm like, oh, this is interesting, and then I just started to stream.
I was taking an early dinner, and I saw your invite, and I looked at this, and I started cracking up, and I'm like, all right, I'm getting an Uber right now.
All right. Well, I guess are they reconvening in the morning?
I believe so. I don't
know. I'll look at my schedule. I'll probably kick it back out. I'm still interested in it. I'm not saying I'll go through the whole trial, but I think I'll start in the morning.
All right, I'll be there.
That's as much as I'm committing to.
Let me answer Matty Graham real quick. Let me answer Matty Graham real quick, because he asked, what the fuck, really, John? Explain why do you, as a defense lawyer, record yourself every 6 minutes? Because we bill by the hour, and you usually break it down by every 10th of an hour. So every 6 minutes, we are charging you. So if my hourly rate is, let's say, $100, every 6 minutes is $10. So I actually have to give you an invoice. And a lot of times I work for insurance companies. They will kick that back at you if you don't have it broken down perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
That's the answer.
It's a miserable existence. It is. All right, everybody who hasn't already, go over to Jay Rabine. His channel's absolutely exploding. He's got cool stuff over there. He had the classic haunted Halloween case yesterday. You're getting it all done over there.
I thought that was fun.
Yeah, over 4,000 already. Look at you.
Yeah, I'm getting there. We're getting there. And no, it's cool. I have some great folks, and obviously Jay Robine on Twitter as well. Check it out. I've had plenty of people DM me asking questions. I won't do any individualized kind of legal advice, but general stuff, I'm happy to talk with folks. It's okay. It's doing all right.
What did they say about me? What was going on? Were you guys beating me up on this stream?
Usually I'm supposed to be the beating post. I'm the danger.
Oh, I do think you should call your chat the Ginger Snaps, though. That is nice. That is nice.
There's I don't know if you saw it on Twitter, but somebody put something together from last night. It's hilarious. I'll send it to you.
All right. Well, now I have to fix this. And John, even though you don't realize this, I'm now going to figure out some way to make some kind of a thumbnail for this situation. Also find the caption. I did nothing. I just literally started it.
Wait, thumbnails are a thing?
Thumbnails are a thing, as are titles and everything else.
I make it up as I go.
As we speak, I'm thinking, should I just go there? Should I just go there and be immature about these titles, or should I straight face this thing and call this I'll straight face it. I will. I'm going to call it New Mexico versus Areola. No, versus Cummings.
There's no way to do it right.
There's no way to not do it.
There's no way to do it without the innuendo.
Not any knows where I'm at.
Which I think is goddamn hilarious. There's literally no way.
Thanks for coming by. You're gonna, if we do this trial, you're gonna have to put up with me putting this on in the middle of routine instruction. Because
I'm assuming that's a
we've
yes.
all seen it here.
Okay.
Most of my viewers have seen this stuff, and I can't just do it straight anymore. So that's how we're dealing. All right, you're the best, brother. Thanks for coming by.
Take care, sir. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, talk to you all soon.